I have the honor of acting as facilitator to our wonderful panel that we have with us today. Over the next hour, we will explore how enhanced collaborative efforts by governments and international stakeholders can maximize the positive social impacts of clean energy policy and help to embed fairness and inclusion within clean energy policies. I'd like to just give you an introduction to our panel, who probably need no introduction. We have the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources. We have Chief Sharleen Gale, who is the chair of Canada's First Nations Major Project Coalition, U.S. Secretary of Energy Jennifer Granholm, Senegal's Minister of Petroleum and Energy, Monsieur Diome, and European Commissioner for Energy, Kadri Simson, and Sharan Burrow, who's the General Secretary for the International Trade Union Confederation and Chair of the IEA Clean Energy Labour Council. I'd like to start by inviting Brian Motherway, the IEA's Head of Energy Efficiency and Inclusive Transitions, to say a few introductory remarks.
Thank you, Rachel. Ladies and gentlemen, Minister Wilkinson, Chief Gale, Secretary Granholm, Commissioner Simpson, Minister Diome, Sharan Burrow, Rachel. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an honour to be here at this really important event. And first of all, let me thank all of our good friends in Canada for the leadership and collaboration to deliver this particular event. Minister, I want to thank you personally for your leadership on this topic in many ways, and many of the dimensions we'll be talking about today, Canada's leadership. But I also want to say to you, Minister, it's been a great pleasure to work with your entire team organising this event, Rachel, but also Christine, Isabel, Erica, Annette, and all of the colleagues. So thank you very, very much. We're also delighted to be a partner of many of the colleagues here in the Clean Energy Ministerial's Empowering People initiative, which is led by Canada, US, and the European Commission. And these are just some dimensions of this growing focus on this topic that we're here to talk about today, which is why are we doing clean energy transitions? We're doing them to make people's lives better. We're doing it to create prosperity, good-paying jobs. We're doing it to enhance people's lives through better energy access and affordability, addressing questions of exclusion and poverty, and we're making sure that this IEA 50th anniversary ministerial remembers that by putting a focus on people at the heart of clean energy transitions. This is very much a driver for us in the IEA. You'll know that our Executive Director takes these issues very personally and very seriously, and I'm delighted to say that he has established a new office focused on inclusive transitions, and we'll be talking about some of the issues today, including our work on skills and jobs. You'll also be seeing some new analysis coming from the IEA shortly around questions of affordability and fairness in clean energy transition policies. And I'm also very pleased to tell you that in just a few weeks' time, at the end of April, on April 26th, the IEA will host here in Paris its first ever global summit on people-centred transitions, where many of you, I hope, will join us again for a high-level discussion on what do we really mean by making sure that clean energy policies are people-centred and fair. I think we all know why we're doing that. We all need to sometimes remind ourselves in some of the more technical and abstract discussions that we're not just talking about technology, we're not just talking about policy, we're talking about people, and we're talking about enhancing people's lives. Because that's the reason we're doing these policies, but also without a focus on fairness and the perceptions of fairness, inclusion and acceptability, we simply won't succeed in these transitions. And our colleagues here know this very well in terms of the lessons of success and what makes policies more acceptable, more fair, more beneficial to the people who need those benefits most. So we at the IEA are very proud to be part of this event. We're very pleased that it's on the agenda. We want to thank the Minister and the whole Canadian team for their leadership in making sure we have this focus on people, jobs, prosperity and fairness at the IEA Ministerial. And we're looking forward to today's discussion. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, Brian, and to all of your team for your collaboration for making this possible today. I would now like to ask my Minister, the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, Canada's Minister of Energy and Natural Resources, to make opening remarks.
Thank you, Rachel. Hello, bonjour tout le monde.
Good afternoon.
Nous parlons tous beaucoup du
We talk for clear reasons that about climate change because it changes the environment in many harmful ways.
You folks know very well, is burning up. The world's top scientists have been measuring it for decades, and everywhere we see it, in the floods, the wildfires, and the storms that have been happening very much in Canada, right now in Chile, but certainly all around the world. But beyond its increasingly significant impacts on our environment, climate change is also rapidly transforming the global economy and global finance in ways that are creating enormous economic opportunities for those who approach the transition to a low-carbon future in a thoughtful and strategic way. The global energy transition that is already well underway is both an environmental imperative to save the planet for future generations, but it is also an economic opportunity that is on the scale of the Industrial Revolution. In the IEA's 2023 World Energy Outlook, Dr. Burrow noted that, and I quote, "The transition to clean energy is happening worldwide and it is unstoppable. It is not just a question of if, it is a matter of how soon." I'm here to say that for countries around the world to seize the extraordinary economic opportunities enabled by the transition to a low-carbon future, we must accept the scientific reality of climate change and ensure that it informs and shapes our economic strategies. Success in this regard is critically important not only for the future prosperity of our respective economies, it is in fact critical to our collective ability to fight climate change. You know, folks often talk about climate change in the negative in terms of the threat that it poses us. And I think there's probably 20 to 25% in our respective countries of folks that are willing to make significant sacrifices in their daily lives because of the threat of climate change. On the other end, there's 10 to 15% of our populations that actually don't believe climate change is real or don't think it's very important. But the bulk of the folks are in the middle. They accept the reality of climate change. They understand it's important. They want governments and business to do more, but they also want to know they're going to have a job tomorrow, and they want to know that their children are going to have a job next year. We simply must offer a thoughtful and compelling economic vision of a low-carbon future if we are to bring the vast majority of citizens with us on this journey. That is why this discussion is so important. Thoughtful and successful approaches to building a prosperous and inclusive economy for the future are fundamental for our ability and indeed our collective duty to future generations to tackle climate change. Building a relevant plan for economic success in a low-carbon future starts with identifying a country or a region's respective comparative advantages and building on their strengths. Success requires thoughtful policy frameworks. It requires the tools to be able to actually create whole new industries in areas like hydrogen or biofuels. It requires an environment that is an attractive one for business investment. It requires collaboration amongst governments, industry, and labour, and in Canada's case, with Indigenous peoples. It requires a focus on skills development and skills training to ensure that workers can and will successfully transition, where required, to areas of rapid economic growth. We each have our own respective advantages in our countries. I would say to you, and I'm obviously biased in this regard, but that Canada is enormously advantaged in part because of the abundance of natural resources that exist within our borders. Certainly, we need to ensure that we are all building on those respective comparative advantages and working collaboratively together to leverage the advantages of others. But beyond specific sectoral opportunities, we need to ensure that we are doing this work in an inclusive way. We need to be working closely with the labour movement, and certainly we are in Canada, on plans to support and create sustainable jobs. We presently actually have a bill in front of Canada's Parliament, which is entitled Sustainable Jobs. It is about setting up a whole range of things, including a partnership council that will advise the Government of Canada on economic strategy, on skills and training strategies. It will be a council that will be comprised of representatives of the labour movement, of business, key experts, of Indigenous peoples, and of youth. And certainly, our approach will ensure that workers have a seat at the table as we discuss the economic future of Canada and, indeed, of the world. And certainly in Canada, and this is true, I think, for a number of countries that would be in this room, we need to ensure that we are inclusive with respect to the perspectives and the interests of Indigenous peoples. Certainly, we need to ensure in Canada that Indigenous peoples are active participants, but that they also see long-term benefits that will flow from participation in the projects that will be enabled through the work done to address climate change. One of the things we are doing in Canada is creating an Indigenous loan guarantee program that will enable access to low-cost debt for Indigenous communities to essentially invest as equity participants in a range of projects associated with the low-carbon transition. Building a prosperous and inclusive economy for the future is important in terms of ensuring a healthy standard of living for our respective citizenries. But it also underpins, in my view, our ability to make progress and to ultimately win the war on climate change. Any country that ignores climate change does not have a relevant economic plan for their future. Any country and any leader that wishes to rally their citizens to aggressively address climate change must have a thoughtful and indeed an optimistic view about the low-carbon economy, one that is inclusive of the perspectives and the interests of workers and of Indigenous peoples. I very much look forward to the remarks of my colleagues, and I certainly look forward to the discussion today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Minister. And it's now very much my pleasure to invite Chief Gale of Canada's First Nations Major Project Coalition to give some of her thoughts. And in particular, would be really interested to hear your impressions with respect to ensuring the inclusion of Indigenous peoples, including in decision-making, and your vision for the future to ensure continued participation to accelerate net zero transition. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chief Sharleen Gale. I'm from the Fort Nelson First Nation, and today I'm here on the capacity as Chair of the First Nation Major Projects Coalition. I also have the pleasure of sitting on Canada's Electricity Council, and so I look forward to meeting many of you after our discussion today. So just back to your question, First Nations in Canada, there's over 600 diverse nations in Canada. And we have our own governments. And, you know, through that process, we go into the decision-making by working with our members and getting consent. And that's a really important practice when we make decisions as communities, because we have to ensure the decisions that we make are going to be good for the 7 generations that follow. When I think about inclusion of First Nations, I think it's really important, especially for the energy transition, because we are leading this transition. Other than municipalities and governments, First Nations are the major owner of clean renewable projects in Canada. For an example, I'm from a territory that is the size of Switzerland. We're not just a small little community on a land base. We actually have many villages within our territory where people were never pushed off by the Indian agent and continued to live a traditional way of life. That isn't connected to any grid. So with that, we, as a people, have the responsibility to ensure that we take care of our lands and our waters. And when we get involved in our economies, and especially in equity positions, we have to have that balance between economic prosperity and environmental stewardship. One of the things that I'm really proud about is that we are repurposing an old oil and gas well for our territory, and it's called Tudeka Geothermal. And this new technology in our territory will replace us using dirty fuels that we're using to produce energy in the region. We are not connected to the grid. The grid is about 4 hours away. It's Site C, and that facility is going to energize and produce power for Kitimat, where the Haisla are looking at powering their LNG facility. So we have to get diverse. We have to start thinking about different ways to be a part of our economies and to be a part of this transition. And I really look forward to being a part of that and the discussions across Canada, because a lot of First Nations in Canada are starting to get on board, whether that's through transmission lines, you know, through lithium, with critical minerals, and electricity. So looking forward to having a great discussion with the panel today.
Merci, Chief Gale, for these thoughtful reflections and also your leadership in Canada and your collaboration with partners in Canada, including with industry and government. Merci. Secretary Granholm, if I could turn to you on this point and welcome your thoughts on effective strategies for engaging communities in the transition to ensure no one is left behind.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks so much for hosting this and for being such a great neighbor in many ways. And I look forward to learning as well as to what works in other places. But here's what I can say from our experience in the Biden administration and the focus that we have placed on place-based strategies. And when I say that, I'm really referring to strategies that impact communities that are really fragile or hurting because of the transition or because they are disadvantaged communities and have historically had the government turn their backs on them, or where there have been decisions made by others to locate, for example, fossil fuel assets or industrial assets, and where communities are breathing particulates, et cetera. It certainly includes tribal communities. The first executive order that the president executed when he came into office was an executive order that's called Justice 40, which meant that 40% of the benefits of the clean energy laws that we knew were coming down the pike must be addressed and located in disadvantaged communities, again, broadly defined like that, 40%. We then passed the Inflation Reduction Act and the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, collectively just massive investments in this clean energy transition. And as a result of that justice for the intentionality in it, and the intentionality that was put into these laws, for example, if you are a solar developer and you want to put up a development, if you choose to put your development in a disadvantaged community, you not only get a 30% investment tax credit for building your project, but you also get another 10%, these are stackable, if you locate in a disadvantaged community. If you also include best practices with respect to labor, meaning apprenticeships, prevailing wage, you get another 10 to 20% on top of that. You could get as much as a 70% tax credit if you located that solar development in a region that has public housing. I mean, the tax credits themselves pull investment into communities that have historically been left behind. And so they do a lot of the work for us. But that's on the tax credit side. We were also given, I say the Department of Energy, we were given $100 billion in grants to be able to push out for these various technologies that we want to see happen. And for all of that, if you are competing for a grant, you have to execute a community benefits plan as part of it. And the evaluation of your project, 20% of it, is based on that community benefits plan. So what does that mean? That means, are you addressing the needs of the disadvantaged community that you may be adjacent to? What are they saying, or in? What are they saying they want from you? And therefore, the grant side, in addition to the tax credit side, is also opening up investment in communities that have been historically left behind. We, too, have a whole series of efforts with respect to communities that are coal and power plant communities. There's additional grants for conversion of fossil assets into renewable assets. There is so much going on embedded in this as well. You talked about a loan guarantee. We have now $20 billion in a loan guarantee for tribal nations. But associated with that, with all of these grant opportunities, especially in communities that may not have a whole lot of resources to be able to apply to the federal government for that, you also have to include technical assistance. And so we have an initiative with both our philanthropic effort as well as through grant efforts to help people build up their ability to do grant writing, to get access to the resources that have been made available. So we're trying to do this in a very holistic way, and we've thought about a lot, but we also are here to learn. We feel like we've got so much going on, so many lessons from just this 2 years that we've had these laws in place, and so much that we know that others are doing that we could benefit from as well.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing some of the strategies to not only drive emissions reductions, but also bring real social benefits to communities that help us bring prosperity and affordability to those communities. J'aimerais avoir maintenant.
Now, I'd like to hear from somebody rather different. We have Minister Diome from Senegal. Could you perhaps cite a few examples of good practice in energy policy which have helped reduce poverty and inequality in your country? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Moderator. For Senegal, I can say that under the steer from our Republic's president, we have launched new inclusive policies and policies for social justice. The idea underpinning this is what we call territorial equity. That is to say, there is a divide between access to electricity in urban areas and access to electricity in rural areas, whereas over 98% of people living in cities have access to electricity. Despite our efforts, we are not. We only have a coverage level of 61% in rural areas. Now, we have made strides over the last 10 years, but it's still less. Not what we want. It was 27% back in 2012, and 2023 it was 61%. President Sall has declared, however, that it's our purpose, our goal, needs to bring electricity to the whole population, but particularly in rural areas, between now and 2026. In terms of the policies we've actually implemented and the strategies, first of all, there are communities in Senegal, and given the territorial particularities we have, communities which are isolated. We have islands, for example, island communities. We have an archipelago, the Selam Islands, 18 islands in total, which are very isolated, which to date have not had continuous and quality access to affordable electricity. Now, thanks to solar energy in particular and mini-grids, these communities have access to electricity. Overall, when it comes to renewables, we've gone from a very low rate of share of renewables in the mix, 8% in 2012, but 31% now. So in terms of installed electricity capacity, it's 31% now, meaning that in terms of our overall installed capacity, the share in renewables is something like 500 megawatts, bringing, therefore, electricity access to isolated communities. That's a large swathe of the population which now has access to electricity. So that, therefore, is the access to electricity side of things. But there's another major issue, which is both economic and a question of public health, and that's access to clean cooking. In Senegal, a number of households, many households, still use wood-fueled stoves. It's mostly women who are using those wood-fueled stoves. With our clean cooking program and improved stoves, we hope that over 500,000 households will have access to better, cleaner cooking, which will make a major contribution to reducing both mortality levels, but also the long-term health conditions that a lot of people in rural areas suffer from, in particular when they're using wood to fuel their stoves. So overall, we can say that this is an issue of energy access, of course, but it's also an issue of social inclusion, equity, and public health. And they were trying to reduce or prevent long-term diseases linked to the use of wood-fueled stoves, and that's why the Senegalese government is looking to bring together those energy policies which aim to reduce inequality between the urban and rural areas. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup pour
Thanks very much for highlighting some very specific different aspects there. We need to talk about energy security, but also access to energy. Obviously, there are issues of public health for the communities.
Alignment with Secretary Granholm about that place-based approach and thinking about what happens in different locations, and that there's not necessarily one strategy that's going to be the same for every community, and thinking about the communities based on what their needs are. So now let's turn to Commissioner Simson. Really interested in hearing your perspectives moving into the space of both jobs and opportunities as you tackle the opportunities from energy transition.
Indeed, for us, energy transition is not only about meeting our global climate goals, but it is also our growth strategy, and that means that we will create new jobs. You have to keep in mind that European Union is still very dependent on imported fossil fuels. Despite the fact that 2 years ago Russia cut us off from gas supplies, and we ourselves have put in place sanctions to Russian oil products, but overall we are big importers of natural gas and oil from reliable suppliers right now. And that also means that at the peak of the price crisis, well, our consumers, our industry, they decided that green transition is our way forward to replace this vulnerability with more reliable alternatives. So across Europe, we installed within 2 years 130 gigawatts of new renewable installations, and it was driven mainly by households. So, well, rooftop solar had real boom in Europe, and of course that creates installation jobs. Then many households were very dependent on gas boilers. Last year alone, we installed across Europe 3 million heat pumps, which is a very promising technology. It helps us to save immensely and gain from energy efficiency side. But despite of that, 1 out of 10 respondents told us that they were not able to keep their houses affordable, well, warm enough, or where the temperatures indoors were not healthy. And that means that they are living in conditions where houses are just not insulated enough. So the most energy or labor-intensive sector where we are now aiming to cut our fossil fuel consumption is building sector. And by renovating our homes, we do hope that even in a very short time frame, by 2030, we will meet very ambitious energy saving targets that we have set ourselves under our Fit for 55 proposal that delivers significant greenhouse gas cuts across Europe. And then job creation also means that we don't want to create new jobs only by installing solar panels that are produced somewhere else. We want to avoid new dependencies, and to create new jobs also here in Europe in the clean tech sector, we have to support our industry. We just finalized negotiations on Net Zero Industry Act. This covers many promising clean tech solutions. And if we are successful, then we do hope that many new production sites will be built in the regions that so far have been very dependent on mining sector. Across Europe, we do have 34 regions where mining industry has provided households and larger communities income for decades. So with our just transition approach, we try to attract new investments, greenfield investments, especially in these regions, because the workforce is there. They are willing to learn new skills, be reskilled, and we are willing to create new jobs in the regions which will be most impacted by our green transition in such a way that they will lose the traditional work opportunities. But saying that, there are new jobs available by promoting green transition. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And you brought up that first pillar of energy demand as an opportunity for jobs and also energy savings and affordability. And also, again, sort of that regional differentiation in terms of the opportunities and also the skills and training that are required, which is a great transition to welcome Sharan Burrow to the conversation, who's the chair of the IEA Clean Energy Labour Council, to welcome your thoughts on sort of the sustainable jobs angle and what the opportunities there are, and also in terms of skills and training that we need.
Thank you very much, and thank you to all the panellists. I just have to correct you. I'm the former General Secretary of the ITUC, and now I work with all of those skills and the commitment of labour in climate finance, just transition and energy policy. But I'm very proud to be the co-chair of the IEA Labour Council. The IEA has made huge attempts to bring people-centred just transition principles into the mix of energy development. The commission they set up, now I've forgotten, Brian, but 5 years ago, leading into the Glasgow COP, where those energy principles, the just energy transition principles, were accepted, the birth of what's been troublesome but was still a really serious commitment to build collective, to share collective wealth with developing economies for the transition, or emerging economies in the case of South Africa, and so on. We can't give up on those ideals. So to have this back on the agenda now, with Canada's leadership and Fatty Birrell's leadership around people-centred transitions, frankly makes me feel great heart. Listening to you all today, you know, putting people at the heart is how we're going to make what is effectively a whole of economy transition, a whole new industrial revolution work at the scale and the speed that we need it to work. But we are already lagging. I get very distressed when I hear people talk about losing jobs. The job story it's not an easy one to simply say there's one for one. But there are many jobs in the process. There's already more jobs in renewable energy than there is in fossil fuels. And yes, it's painful to transition. As someone who's walked those coal-fired power station communities, coal mining communities, was a lifelong friend of our dear departed Richard Trumka, you know, fought about the fact that we had to take the science seriously, that it was the biggest systemic shift we would face in our lifetime, then I must say I'm quite proud of the labour movement, because they, even though it's difficult and fear is still in many communities because labour is a microcosm of our society, nevertheless, they've been leaders. They fought and won just transition in the Paris Climate Agreement. We actually brought people behind a mantra that said there are no jobs on a dead planet. That hasn't shifted. That is still the threat of the destruction of our planet. So to have this discussion and put people and planet at the heart of economic planning, which is founded on energy transition, is magnificent. So I want to thank Canada. I want to acknowledge that they were the first, because, you know, we went to a whole range of governments after the Paris Agreement was signed. I have to tell you that it should have been a big celebration, and it was. But I woke up the next day as then the Secretary of the ITUC thinking, oh my God, what do we do now? Like, how do we make this work? So we went to a number of friends in governments, and Justin Trudeau said yes to the first tripartite coal commission. It worked. People talked to each other. Communities were listened to. and now you see the results of an ongoing discussion in that country, and congratulations on the Sustainable Jobs Bill. I particularly want to come back to you to focus on your partnerships council, because we now need those institutions. We see them in Scotland with the Permanent Just Transition Commission. I'm proud to say in Australia with Minister Bowen and the Net Energy Transition Authority. In Canada now, in South Africa, there are others, but we need many more, because we need to embed the planning and the dialogue and the financing of the continuous transition we need, as Secretary Granholm has described. So what I want to do is two things very quickly. I want to dispel the jobs myth. For every 20 jobs in renewable energy, there's 5 to 7 in manufacturing. If they're good jobs, if they're decent work, there's 30 to 35 jobs in the broader economy. So jobs overall is not the issue. In fact, if you go beyond that, green industrialisation, upstream and downstream processing, gives us the best place-based development opportunities we've had in generations. The real issue is, can we do the planning? Can we see people involved in the developments that will make sure those jobs are there for people to feel confident about? But it even goes beyond that. I've just finished, I've returned to my roots. I started life as a teacher, and I actually just finished a job for our Victorian government, a state in Australia, on apprenticeship policy. I'm absolutely horrified at the job we have to do to get skilled tradespeople. And so if that's the case, we need to get skilled trades teachers. And so there are jobs in teaching. If we're serious about those health impacts and clean cooking and other areas that particularly, looking after nature and preventing the loss of further biodiversity, then there are jobs in areas of stewardship in nature. There's jobs in finance, of course, and Nick Robbins is here. And I will be proud to stand with him as the chair of his advisory council. Will launch the Just Transition Finance Council next week at the London School of Economics. We need to shift the DNA of finance, of economic planning, that puts people and planet at the centre. And I wanted to say resilience is everything. So don't forget the jobs that are in our care economy: health, education, childcare, aged care. We have much to be optimistic about, but it takes inclusion. If we don't involve people, and that means workers and their communities, at the heart of this discussion, if we don't see Indigenous landowners as equity partners, and congratulations on the loan guarantees, because that's a whole attitude shift. But if we don't do those things, you continue to build the fear and resistance, and you're seeing it. Many of you as political operators are seeing the nonsense that is actually lashing out at a clean transition as somehow the enemy of people, when in fact it's our survival. It's the survival of the planet, it's the optimism for renewed investment, and it's an environment that creates a capacity to turn around the inequity, to stop excluding people and put people and planet at the heart of our future endeavours. I'm very optimistic we can do this, but it takes courage, it takes bringing everybody together, and we must have those continuous, permanent dialogues that enable planning, finance, innovation, and a sense of security for people because they feel that they've got a future. And can I just say that Brian Motherway invited you, but can I also invite you to join in the first ever people-centred summit that Fatty Birrell is championing at the end of April. Bring your Labor leaders, bring your progressive business people, and let's have a start at the dialogue that then we hope will continue through the DNA of the IEA as well as all of our nations.
Thank you so much for that really mobilizing call to action and challenge. Minister Wilkinson, you mentioned the sustainable jobs work that we're doing. I wondered if you might provide a bit more reflection on that in the context of opportunities and affordabilities, and after hearing some of your co-panelists speak about the challenges they're tackling.
Yeah, so we in Canada, we've kind of changed the moniker a little bit from just transition to sustainable jobs, and we did that largely because there were parts of the country where people reacted strongly to the just transition argument in the context of seeing this as a threat to the opportunities that they have, particularly parts of the country that are heavily reliant on oil and gas production. And sustainable jobs effectively means the same thing, but it's, in my mind, a slightly more positive and optimistic sort of phrasing in terms of there are jobs and there are opportunities for the future that are going to be sustainable for all regions of our country, and I think that would be true for other countries as well. And that's not, I mean, some people get stuck on the sort of, it's all about skills training and about people being displaced. I think it starts with what are the economic opportunities of the future that you are actually going to build to create these jobs. And yes, there will be some displacement from existing industries, although I think probably from a skills perspective, less than what a lot of people think. I often say to people, you know, if you work in an oil refinery, it's not dissimilar to working in a biofuel refinery. It's not dissimilar to working in a hydrogen production facility. But at the end of the day, we focused very much on developing a view about how we could build on some of the attributes that Canada has. And Canada is a complicated country. It is very diverse from an economic perspective, from one province to another and from one region to another. We put a regional lens on that to try to say we created these mechanisms or tools to have bilateral conversations with each of the provinces to say what are the major areas of economic opportunity and how do we actually work together to ensure that those come to fruition, that they actually create the jobs of the future, and that we put in place the supports that actually will enable people and communities to be successful going forward. And part of that was about building a plan, and we brought forward a Sustainable Jobs Action Plan that we are required now by legislation, or we will be required soon by legislation, to put out every number of years, updating it. But then we also put in place the legislative framework that creates the transparency and that creates the accountability not only on this government but on future governments to continue to do this work. Part of that is requiring ongoing reporting, but part of it is the Partnership Council, where you actually have an institutionalized mechanism to ensure that there's advice coming from the labor movement, from thoughtful folks in business, from Indigenous leaders, and my personal insistence that there has to be young people on this panel, because at the end of the day, a lot of this is being done for them. And that is moving through the parliamentary process at this point in time, but it's creating that view about an optimistic future and the institutional forcing functions to ensure that we continue along this path. Most of us all live in democratic societies. Inevitably, there are changes in governments. Part of what we are trying to do is to establish not only a path, but trying to ensure that we are not forcing future governments, but creating mechanisms that will ensure this conversation continues.
I know Chief Gale has some thoughts about what you just said, Minister, and Chief, while you take the floor, if you could also respond to some of the commentary and discussion about the importance of equity stakes in resource projects as you respond to some of the remarks.
Okay, thank you. I'd just like to thank you, Minister and Sharan, for talking about labor and how, you know, the transition is really pulling our people to the forefront. Traditionally, we were always getting the low-paying jobs, seasonal work. So when, you know, it was time to wrap up a project, people would be laid off. But now, being 100% Indigenous-owned geothermal facility, we're seeing our people that have gone away to university come back home, and they're leading this transition. So that makes us very proud that we're providing that opportunity to our members and to future generations. You know, when we had our first meeting about the geothermal, because we've been involved in oil and gas for 70 years, there was a lot of resistance to move forward. People didn't understand the technology. They didn't understand what we were getting involved in. And through working with the First Nation Major Projects Coalition and other thought leaders that have experience, we brought some people over from New Zealand that have been Indigenous people that had been doing it for 30 years. They shared a lot of their stories. They came into our schools. They came into our community. They attended our conference. And we learned a lot from that. So we're very thankful for our Indigenous friends in New Zealand because they helped us get to yes in so many ways. And through the federal grant that we received a $40 million grant to help us get to that next stage. And I think that's so important for other countries to know that we need to provide those opportunities for First Nations so we can take that first step. If we don't have those opportunities, then we're not going to be able to get involved in the commercial aspect of these projects, which is so important so that we can show other First Nations that this can be done and give them hope. Just getting into your second question, could you remind me, sorry?
I was just wondering if you could speak on the equity partnerships and the role of equity in getting Indigenous communities involved in resource projects.
Yeah, with equity, it's so interesting because it's really important. I look at the industries that are in our community. We have forestry. By working in partnership with our municipality, we secured the biggest community forest in BC, which is tremendous because we're looking at doing another renewable project in pellets. As First Nations, we're always looking at opportunities to manage our resources. And so through the equity transactions, we have seen different models that First Nations have been getting involved in. And one of the ones that I'm very proud of is through Hydro One in Ontario. We worked with our First Nations to ensure that any greenfields going forward, they'd be offered 50% equity, and those will go to the nations that are affected by their projects. I really encourage other provinces and territories and companies and countries to look at that model. I think it's really important. If we're going to be able to get through this energy transition in a fast-paced, in a way that includes all of us, then we do need to include our Indigenous communities. We need to have those hard discussions to really get to the solutions that are going to make this possible for all of us. I think First Nations, really have a lot to offer. We're, always looking about sustaining our environment and doing that in a balanced approach with the economic opportunities that we do have. But I have to thank our Canadian government for embracing Indigenous loan guarantees. We got to remember they're not loans. They are backstops. They're going to help us move forward. And it's so important going forward, especially in the provinces. We see some of the provinces in BC, Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Alberta. They're also getting on board and providing Indigenous loan guarantees. And that is really tremendous because, our nations want to get involved in solar, wind, geothermal, critical minerals. And it's an exciting time for us. We're all learning at the same time. And I think by bringing more people together, they're going to be built on time. We're going to have to really look at these policy mechanisms, how regulators are operating, break down some of the barriers that are happening in Canada, get these rates looked at, and really fix these wheeling policies as we move forward. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Secretary Granholm, if we can shift back to sort of the jobs and training and skills aspect, really interested to see, with all of these great programs that you're putting out, what you're seeing in the United States.
Yeah, can I brag for a moment about my president or the administration? Since President Biden took office, there have been 14.8 million jobs created in the United States. That's more than any president in the history of the United States during that period of time. Our unemployment rate has been below 4% for over 50 years now. The longest point of under 4% in 50 years. That is a record. Wages are going up. A lot of that is because of the laws that we passed. Look, good news, policy matters, and it actually works. So the investments that we're making in infrastructure in this clean energy economy are creating huge opportunities for people to get good jobs. Our president is the most pro-labor president in American history. And this is why there's incentives in all these tax credits for apprenticeships, for prevailing wage. But because the unemployment rate is so low and because so many jobs are being created, we really have to work very hard to recruit people for the right jobs, the right skill sets, right? And so in all of these grant opportunities, let me just give you an example. For example, we just awarded 7 hydrogen hubs in the U.S., $8 billion in 7 regions of the country. Hydrogen hub workers aren't necessarily just there, ready to go, right? You have to train people. And so in those community benefit plans that are attached to each of those, they have to tell us, what are you doing in your education system to make sure you have a pipeline of workers? What are you doing in partnering with labor and getting apprenticeships so people can earn while they learn? What are you doing with your community colleges to ensure you have a skill set? We have put out, there have been 150 battery plants that have popped up, whether it's the pieces to the battery, anode, cathode, separator material, electrolyte. All of those require a skill set, right? And so with labor, we are working on a battery workforce initiative. What are the components of learning how to build a battery that you can just plug and play in your community college with apprenticeships, et cetera? So those, and let me just say this. It is so important on the skills side that you train people for what jobs are coming or are there, and not just an abstraction. It's so helpful to be able to harness your education system on the job, with the job providers that are locating in that area. So they're learning something that is very concrete that they will have an opportunity to be hired for. And finally, I just want to say, Canada has been leading internationally this equality by 30 effort, and just on the justice side of this, on the equity side of this, so important that we all set out big goals for ensuring that everybody has access to these jobs opportunities, and that we really work to lift more women, more people of color, more tribal nations at the table when we're doing this. We have an effort inside of the Department of Energy to do this. In order to implement all of these plans, we've had to hire 800 people. I'm so proud to say that 60% of those have been women, and that is really an effort. We're trying to work, we've got to up our numbers on people of color. We're really trying to be intentional about it. So this whole expansion of this clean energy sector and all of the jobs that you were describing gives us an opportunity to really correct the inequities of the past. I call it, we often talk about structural inequity, but we're trying to embed structural equity into all of these provisions, and it's a great opportunity for us and for the world.
Thanks so much. And yes. And we're going to turn back to gender in a bit, but how exciting is it that we have more and more energy, women in energy at the ministerial level, at the working level, and also at the policy and decision-making level. So thanks for that. Si je peux me tourner maintenant vers...
If I may now turn to Minister Diome to speak about this issue. Minister, I'd like to hear something about Senegal's approach when it comes to development strategies in clean energy. What are the challenges for the market, for labor, in the short and long term? Yes, thank you very much. When it comes to renewables, and I mentioned this earlier on, there's been a stunning development when it comes to renewable energies in installed capacity for production. Now, I heard with interest what the United States mentioned earlier on this issue. And also one of the panelists mentioned the necessary adaptation when it comes to labor and employment. In the past, it was from fossil fuels that we found the energy that was necessary for production and for producing plants. But now we're in a new change. And when we're talking about these changes in energy, we also need to speak about adaptation. That is why in Senegal we have set up special training centers in order to get this transition of employment right in the context of the energy transition and the transition of the energy economy. And that's why it's important as well for relationships between the global north and south. And we need to have strong advocacy on the issue that there is a need to have a sort of technological transfer, because most plants that create renewables that we're launching are built with partnerships with northern countries such as France, the UK, Germany, Canada, or the United States. Every time that we have a partnership in order to create new power plants, all the technologies come from countries of the global north. So most of the time, the labor that we find is local, but this labor on the ground also has to be updated in terms of qualifications. It has to be upskilled in order to be able to manage and support this transition that is being carried out. And with this change from fossil fuels to renewables. And you've also given me the opportunity to speak about a partnership that has been reached with a number of international partners, including Canada. We signed a partnership called the JETP, the Just Energy Partnership, which is a compact that was signed with Canada, the UK, France, and the European Union. This is a partnership that will allow us, in the next 3 years, to raise about 2.35 billion euros in order to radically transform the strategic orientations in the field of developing energy production, and also to gradually abandon the most polluting fossil fuels to new energies, such as gas, for example, which has been qualified as a transition energy in order to be able to progress. And finally, there are two important points that need to be kept in mind when it comes to this necessary supervision of this change in employment that will have to take place in order to go from fossil fuels to renewables. Well, first of all, we need to monitor financing. At the beginning, it is clear that what was expected is to have financing costs that are more affordable when it comes to financing renewables. This was something that was expected, and we had high hopes. But unfortunately, what we're seeing now is that inflation is hitting financing costs of renewables and makes it less attractive. It is less attractive to certain investors and partners who would otherwise come and install these renewable industries. And second issue, which has to be monitored closely, is technology transfer, which is essential, whereby it's essential to supervise and support trained local labor in order to increase participation by the local population when it comes to construction of these plants, but also when it comes to their operation. Senegal remains an open country, a country that wants to be a leader and work hand in hand with all our partners, including those who are part of this panel. But what is essential, and this is something that's very close to my heart, we need advocacy for a transition that is just and equitable and that leaves no one behind.
Another impassioned call for action about important moment in time. Commissioner Simson, I'd like to turn to you to share some thoughts from a European perspective on skills training and opportunities in our communities.
As you know, in European Union, 27 member states are very different. That means that also their pathway to become, as union, climate neutral is uniquely tailor-made. But despite the fact that green transition will bring us more affordable prices and takes care of our energy security, we are facing the same challenges than our partners across the globe. So financing is a challenge for us too. The grid development is lagging behind to allow us to bring online as much renewables as we want. But I think that the major challenge right now is public acceptance. So very often the projects are delayed because local communities are well hesitant. They are not sure if they want these wind farms or these fields covered by solar panels in their close proximity. And I just wanted to share with you some of the success stories. Here in Europe, we are very proud of some technologies where we still hold the global leadership, for example, offshore wind. And some of the new offshore wind farms, one windmill is as tall as Eiffel Tower. So this is a question, if you want to see from your coast wind farms. And we do have some very advanced regions where they have built wind farms already past 30 years. And what we see there is that local communities where grandfathers were working as fishermen and their children were servicing offshore drilling sites, then the current generation, they are servicing offshore wind farms that delivers them very good salary. This is not seasonal work, this is all year around. And this has created a very wealthy communities where people really do see a good prospects for their kids also. And now when we are bringing online a large-scale floating offshore, this also gives additional opportunities for shipyards. So really something that allows us to plan our future in such a way that our 5 sea basins will be in the future our green power plants. Another example which creates some excitement is that for solar farms there is like everlasting competition for the land. But we do have farmer communities who have solved this in such a way that they are covering the fields like 7 meters high with solar panels. It gives additional shade, creates additional revenues, and by doing so, these communities will earn revenues and taking care of some of their own energy consumption. Of course, it demands skilled workforce, but well, I think that across Europe we do understand now that reskilling is a way what we all have to accept. Might be so that the very first education that you received will not serve you until the end of your life, but you have to learn new skills in the decades when you are active in the workforce. And last year it was Year of Skills in Europe, just to highlight that this is a challenge, but also a great opportunity.
Thanks so much, and I think that speaks to resilience and adaptation, like in Senegal as well. I know we have just a little bit over 5 minutes left, but I want to come back to gender, Sharan. And Canada is a big sponsor of gender work at the IEA to think about your practices, your thoughts on gender disparities and gender equality in the clean energy transition. And then just let you know that we have a really exciting youth rapporteur to close the session and give some final remarks. Thank you.
So I'll be really quick. Gender's a major problem in the energy industry, and I thank the US for putting industry policy back on the agenda. It is actually the lifeblood of continuing development, and if we get it right, place-based development and security. But when you look at the fact that there's less than 10% of women apprentices in traditional trades related to the energy industry, even though we do better in engineers in terms of graduates, it's little more than that in terms of employment. Then that generates the employment profile into this energy mix. And of course, green industrialisation is pretty much in the same camp. So we are doing very badly. And there is, an absolute need to have a good look at the culture of our workplaces, to start promoting these good, well-paid jobs. You know that now with technology there can be no difference in terms of height and weight and strength and so on, from our school sectors right through. So continuous learning and improvement, but at its heart, it's not about the education, it is about the culture. And it's not too different for people of different race, and indeed, despite the fact that we rely, Canada, Australia, particularly on immigrant labour, the US, etc., when we have a skills deficit. But it's also about the increasing mental health of our young people, and we're not equipping our workplaces to deal with that, or indeed disability. So we need to share some real thinking about how we shift workplace cultures. We also need to do what the Minister implored us and share technology across countries. If we don't have the partnerships, our IP models are absolutely useless in terms of the speed and scale. We can pay out patents with technology pools and so on, but if we're not prepared and we don't learn the lessons of vaccine nationalism from COVID, then we will not meet the challenge. So sharing technologies, changing the workplace culture, really investing in industry policy that generates a future that's inclusive, that means for me a just transition.
Thanks so much. And on Equal by 30, just to say thank you to Commissioner Simpson. The EU has joined Equal by 30. It's something that Canada has been spearheading for a number of years. And to all of you in the audience, those of you online, if you haven't joined Equal by 30, you can do it as a country, you can do it as a company, you can do it as an organization, and we are always looking to collaborate with partners on bringing that gender lens to the energy transition. So please let us know if you're interested. So we talked a little bit about energy access, which is part of the Sustainable Development Goals. And so it's really my pleasure, and Minister Wilkinson talked about the importance of youth, to bring David up to the podium to do a bit of a summary, because I know the ministerial opening session is going to come in here soon, and so we need to empty the room. But please, David, is the global focal point for the SDG 7 youth constituency. Welcome you to give your thoughts on the session.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And I think I would like to really appreciate our panelists for such a fantastic session we've had. I have a written note. It's been quite an exciting conversation, and it's a whole lot of work to put in all the thoughts together. But I'll try my best. Give me applaud at the end of the speech if I try my best. All right. Warm greetings, dear leaders and delegates present at this dialogue. I wish to start by appreciating the International Energy Agency and the Government of Canada for putting this dialogue together. This high-level ministerial dialogue had the objective to spotlight key issues at the heart of building a prosperous and inclusive economy for the future, with a focus on people-centered clean energy transitions, emphasizing on jobs, skills, equity, leadership opportunities, and social inclusion. We applaud and appreciate our esteemed panelists for sharing meaningfully to this session. Energy lies at the heart of economic development, poverty eradication, job creation, sustainability, youth, and women empowerment. Today's high-level dialogue, we explore two essential themes that would drive a people skills-centered energy transition. First, we explored skills development and jobs for all. A critical look was given to employment opportunities and skills and training programs required to drive a cleaner energy future, highlighting their potential to promote social inclusion and economic opportunities. Secondly, advancing social inclusion and fairness. We expanded on the positive social impacts of clean energy policy and the necessity of embedding fairness and inclusion within energy policies. The session underscored how our net zero future is not just a nice to have, but an actionable plan for job creation, economic competitiveness, and prosperity. Meeting all the SDGs by 2030 could stimulate $12 trillion in market opportunities and create over 380 million new jobs. It is important that leaders and delegates here recognize that the future generations will be most impacted by the meaningful actions taken today. Youths will be impacted by facilitating green jobs, capacity building for future generations to effectively perform these roles, relevant financing mechanisms to support the emergence of bankable businesses and projects, noting that clean energy entrepreneurs can be better supported to unlock financing, gender dimensions and mainstreaming to further strengthen through policies and intentionality of relevant mentorship programs. Lastly, indigenous people and underrepresented groups must be engaged through the right communication and through the right medium. As we continue to make positive change, let us remember that sustainable development is the ability to meet current needs without jeopardizing the chances of future generations to meet theirs. Thank you, and happy 50th anniversary IEA. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. And you got your applause, so you did a great job. Thank you. I'd like to thank my minister for his leadership in bringing this important topic and all of our panelists for bringing their viewpoints and experiences. The minister will report out on today's session into the ministerial tomorrow to ensure that all the great discussions we had today are brought to the formal program on this IEA 50th anniversary and as we look ahead to 2050. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, panelists.